Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's telephone town hall with Congressman Adam Smith. My name is Robin, and I'll be moderating the event this afternoon. During today's call, we'll be taking as many questions as we possibly can from constituents like you. If you would like to ask a question, please press *3 on your telephone keypad now. You may also sign up for the Congressman's e-newsletter by pressing *6 at any time during the call. Again, please press *3 now to ask a question or *6 to subscribe to the Congressman's newsletter. If you are watching the live stream on adamsmith.house.gov, you can submit a question by typing it in the box directly below the streaming player. Now I'd like to turn the call over to Congressman Adam Smith. Congressman, you are live and the floor is yours, sir.
Well, terrific. Thank you very much. And I appreciate everyone for joining this afternoon. We're trying to do telephone town halls at least once a week, maybe sometimes drift into 2 weeks. My schedule doesn't always permit, but I think it's really important to stay in touch, communicate regularly. I found this to be a very effective way to do it. Get as many questions as I can take, and also just give you sort of an update on some of the things that are happening, because this is an incredibly challenging time for our district, state, and country, and for the world, for that matter. I'm deeply concerned about a lot of the actions that President Trump is taking. I want to update you on that and on the work to try to blunt and stop some of those actions. Try to put it in sort of 3 broad categories. One is sort of executive overreach, where the president is clearly exercising power in violation of the law and the Constitution. A number of court decisions have been made against that. And in that area, regardless of the policy being advanced, doing so in violation of the law risks jeopardizing the legitimate democracy and the idea that everyone should have a voice in how we are governed, and that we are a nation of laws, not of an individual. There's a lot going on in that area. Second, basic harm being done to the country, weakening of the country through things like the tariffs, firing of a lot of employees at the Social Security Administration, just to give one example, and how it's made it much more difficult now for people to access their Social Security benefits. And then lastly, we've got the budget fight coming up. Now, over top of all 3 of those issues, something I've talked about a lot, the one big, clear challenge that we face as a country is the lack of opportunity and lack of equality. There's too much concentration of wealth. A very small percentage of people enjoy an almost unimaginable level of wealth, while roughly 60% of the population struggles to pay their bills. We need policies that will address that will broaden opportunity, get us to greater equality. I support the minimum wage. I support strengthening unions. I support strengthening overtime pay for workers, so that workers can begin to get a greater share of the economic pie that increasingly is going to investors and shareholders. Another good idea would be to get rid of stock buybacks, a thing that enables publicly traded corporations to reward shareholders at the expense of their workers. A lot of things we can do in that area. And while President Trump talks about his concern about inequality, I don't think the policies being put in place are getting us there. Obviously, the number one biggest headline from this week is the unprecedented implementing of across-the-board tariffs. Tariffs implemented on more than 100 different countries. A minimum of 10% on everyone, and then a very complicated formula that rose tariffs on dozens of other countries even further than that. This does not appear to be particularly well thought out. It's already had a devastating impact on the stock market. It will also drive up inflation, jeopardize our economy. We're trying to build support to turn those back around, and I'll talk more about that in a moment. So the tariffs are the big issue right now, but we still have the mass firings of federal employees in a variety of different agencies. We still have programs being shut down, and we still have a number of court orders that have been issued against the president's actions, telling him, for instance, to rehire employees, to turn back on programs. In one particular instance, after they accidentally deported someone to El Salvador, there's a court order telling the president to bring that person back. All of these court orders, not all of them, many of them are being ignored. by the Trump administration. I've said before, next big step in this, courts need to bring sanctions against the executive branch for disobeying the court orders. That's fines, potentially jail time for officials who aren't paying attention. If they don't do that, then the court orders really have no meaning. They've issued them, they've been ignored, they need to make efforts to enforce them. And I am deeply concerned about the president's abuse of power. And there are countless examples here. He is sanctioning law firms simply because they have hired someone who has worked for Democrats before. Basically saying that law firms can't do business with the federal government, which really impedes their ability to function. That is coercion. He is threatening universities if they don't adopt policies that he likes with cutting off all federal funding, which, by the way, undermines incredibly important research. University of Washington is engaged in many important healthcare research projects that are being placed in jeopardy by these threats. Threats that have no foundation in the Constitution, do not obey the law. Lawsuits are being brought to try to turn that around. All of that is placing enormous pressure on universities, individuals, businesses, really jeopardizing our economy. The president has also threatened to target states where he doesn't like their policies to cut off funding for, everything from transportation to a wide variety of different grants that the states get from the federal government. This is disruptive and chaotic, and we're seeing the impact on our economic well-being. So it's a deep, deep concern, both because of the law and because of the economic impacts of these policies. One last thing before I talk about the efforts to try and overturn this, and that's the budget fight that we're about to enter into. The Senate and the House are attempting to reconcile their budget agreements. They differ in some ways, but the bottom line is they do somewhere between $4 and $6 trillion in tax cuts. They call for cuts to a wide variety of different programs, including Medicaid, and they drive the debt up by several trillion dollars. They don't even really get after the fiscal problem that we have with a very large debt and deficit because they prioritize tax cuts that primarily benefit the wealthy and will only further exacerbate that wealth gap that I talked about. The Senate passed their second version of the budget resolution last week. The House is supposed to take one up this week. Whether or not the House and the Senate ever get to agreement, I don't know. But we are attempting to block that in any way possible, because massive tax cuts that drive up the debt and cuts to crucial programs for working people across this country are the exact opposite of what we need to do right now. I believe there is momentum building to oppose many of these policies. You saw yesterday there were protests all across the country bringing attention to some of the impacts that I just laid out. You have seen Republicans in particular speak out against the tariffs that the president imposed, because they go against what even most Republicans believe, and they begin to see the impact on their constituents. It's simple. We got to keep raising our voices and building support. We have to expand the number of people who see the threats and the dangers of these policies. And I've said this many times, part of this is we have to be willing to listen to and work with people who voted for Trump, people who disagree with the Democratic Party. We have to try to expand our base of support. We have to be able to listen and work with people to get that level of support. Because the bottom line here, we need to get to the point where Republican members of Congress fear their constituents more than they fear Trump. And then we can have the votes to block what they're trying to do on the budget, on the tariffs, on a lot of the firings, on a lot of the program cuts. There are very narrow majorities in the House and the Senate. It only takes a few to stand up in order to stop this from going forward. Now, the last thing I'll say before I turn it over to your questions is, in the midst of all of this, we do have to come up with a reasonable alternative to what Trump is doing, a policy agenda that addresses the concerns of the American people. I've mentioned economic inequality. It's at the top of the list. It's the biggest thing people are concerned about. More support for working people so that they can get better wages, better benefits, more affordable housing, more affordable education, basically be able to make it economically, to live up to that basic concept. Work hard, play by the rules, you will have opportunity in this country. For too many people, that's no longer true. We have to work on that economic piece. I also think it is important, while I really disagree with the way the president is treating the immigration system. He's basically cut off all immigration, well, except for white South African or people white people from South Africa. He has violated due process and the rights. He's violated people's free speech rights by deporting people. But I think as Democrats, we also need to say, what would we do to secure the border in a more reasonable and rational way that respects the need for immigration, but also recognizes the challenge of making sure that we have a secure border. So we got to go aggressively after what Trump is doing, build support to blunt and stop these policies that are so harmful to our country, and then offer a better alternative. I think we have clearly many options for a better alternative. We have to articulate that and advocate for it as we build support for a better and different vision for our country. 1,000 things going on. I could talk for the full hour, but that's not productive. So I want to take your questions, comments. So I look forward to that. And the last thing I'll say before I turn it over to that, please keep contacting me. This is one way that I can hear from you, but you can always call, email, text. You can reach out to our office anytime. Please keep doing that. And also reach out to other members of Congress as well to express your opinions. With that, I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Congressman. As I'd mentioned earlier in the call, folks, this is an interactive forum, and we'd love to hear from you this afternoon. Please, if you have a question, press *3 on your telephone keypad. And if you'd like to subscribe to the Congressman's e-newsletter, you can press *6. Congressman, your first question was submitted online. Barb asks, what are the short and long-term effects of these tariffs for the average person?
Yeah. Well, it's a tax, first of all, and it's an incredible increase in taxes because, like I said, these tariffs are being placed on over 100 different countries and at very high levels, and they're in addition to taxes the president has already placed on steel, aluminum, cars, and some tariffs that he slapped on Canada and Mexico. So pretty much everything you buy will be more expensive because you're paying a tax in addition to whatever the cost of that good was. So short term, a lot of different prices are going to go up. The other impact, and we've already seen this, countries are retaliating. They are placing tariffs on U.S. goods. This has a particularly harsh impact on agriculture. We export a lot of our agriculture. Countries are now going to be buying less of that. So if you are a business that exports anything, your cost of exporting is going to go up as well. So in the short term, you're going to have less access to the goods that you need, and they're going to be more expensive, and your business is going to find it harder to get parts. Well, if you manufacture, I mentioned steel and aluminum. Most things that are manufactured in this country use steel and aluminum. If steel and aluminum is more expensive, the cost of your manufacturing goes up. Building housing. We get 75% of our drywall from Mexico. That price is going to go up. So the price of the materials that are necessary to build things go up. Long term, you could get into a debilitating trade war that could lead to a recession. You'll see inflation go up because goods are more expensive, but you will also see businesses making lower investments. Now, one of the things the president says in defense of his tariffs is we want to make more stuff here in the U.S. So the thinking is if it becomes really expensive to import steel, aluminum, drywall, whatever, we'll make it here. The problem with that is a lot of these things, you can't just snap your fingers and create a manufacturing plant for some of these for many of these goods. And it's very expensive to do so, very expensive to build. And in many cases, it's prohibitively expensive. And what I mean by that is they won't do it. Even with greater access to the U.S. market, the cost involved in doing that manufacturing domestically will be so high that they just won't decide to do it. So you'll simply have less access to the goods that you need, and they will be more expensive. So tariffs can be part of an intelligent economic real policy. You can pick industries where we are competitive in, where we can manufacture, and you can use them to protect that industry and give it a greater competitive advantage in the domestic U.S. market and potentially in overseas markets. There is nothing targeted, tactical, or intelligent about these tariffs. This is an all-out war. Like I said, 100 different countries. And the way they calculated the tariffs, sorry if I can just walk into this. First of all, They calculated it basically on if we had a trade deficit with any country in the world, um, we placed the tariff on them based on the size of that trade deficit. Well, in some instances, it's from countries that make things that we don't make here. There's been some stories about the tiny country of Lesotho. They produce diamonds. We don't produce diamonds. We don't have them. So yes, we have a trade deficit in that. Well, now there's a massive tariff being placed on that. There's a variety of different other products that fall into that category. Also, we didn't calculate the trade advantages that we have in services. These tariffs are all based on goods. We actually have trade surpluses in a wide range of services. Well, now the other countries are going to place tariffs on those services. So this was really sort of a just back of the napkin, almost made up calculation that has cast us into a trade war with no particular end in sight. So all those implications that I just said will get worse over time.
Thank you, Congressman. Your first caller is Abraham from Tukwila. Abraham, you are live on the call with the Congressman. Please go ahead and ask your question. Abraham, you're live on the call.
Sorry. Congressman, are there any plans to try to defend workers' rights outside of the public sector? They've been going after the National Labor Relations Act, the NLRB. They've been firing everybody. My question is there a strategy, some way that the folks that are actually have contracts can expect that those contracts will be honored?
Yes, the main strategy is lawsuits, and they have been filed in a wide variety of different areas. And yes, many of the people who have been impacted by this are private sector workers. Grants that have been frozen in a variety of different areas, in many cases, are contracts that private sector workers have. Also, yeah, as you've mentioned, the president is not supportive of the National Labor Relations Board enforcing laws that protect workers, but those laws are on the books. So where they are not being used, you can file lawsuits and have the court enforce them. The other thing that I am doing, and others are as well, is trying to build broader support in Congress for workers. Keep in mind that Trump and Vance talked a lot about how they want to support working people. That was a huge part of the theme. But what you just described is them not supporting working people. So we need constituents. The protests are really important. People showing up at town hall meetings in Republican districts talking about it helps change the minds of Republicans because they are harming the very working class that they got elected to protect.
Thank you, Congressman. Thank you, Abraham, for your question. Congressman, your next question was submitted by Catherine on Facebook. Catherine says, how are you working with Nick Brown to join lawsuits focused on rehiring federal employees? Catherine says, I am one of the many HHS employees fired on Tuesday, and these firings are hurting our state and our constituents.
Well, first of all, let me say I'm very sorry. And the way the president has treated federal workers over and above the damage that it's doing to our economy, it is simply cruel and wrong. People are showing up at work, and if their passcode doesn't work, that means they're fired. They're not getting any notice. They're not being treated with any respect. It is just the wrong way to treat human beings, no matter what. So I apologize on behalf of the federal government for all of the workers that have had to go through this. And also, I want to point out the federal workforce is one of the backbones of this country that never gets the respect that it deserves. Federal workers at the Social Security Administration, at the Veterans Administration, at doing research, at HHS, all across the board, we have an incredibly talented workforce that is making a difference. And I've made this point before, but I'll keep making it. Our federal workforce has not grown in size at all over the course of the last 40 years. And I'm not talking about as adjusted for inflation or population growth. It has been flat. This idea that we have this huge bloated bureaucracy with workers not doing anything is simply wrong. We have kept our federal workforce pretty lean and pretty mean because it hasn't grown in 40 years. And they've been providing incredible services to the American people. To answer your question specifically, my office is in pretty much constant contact with Nick Brown's office. I've spoken with him several times since this has happened. We are coordinating those lawsuits. And as I've also mentioned, the next big step is enforcing the court rulings. We've gotten a ton of court rulings saying you have to hire back these workers. Some of them have been hired back, but a lot of them haven't. We must push to make sure those court rulings are enforced. So we're in close contact with Nick. I think Nick has been doing a really good job of coordinating with the other attorney generals across the country who are facing these same situations. Federal workers have rights. Those rights have been violated. We need to work with our attorney generals as well as any private law firms as well to uphold those rights. So I'm working closely with Nick. We're trying to get those things enforced and to get workers back their jobs and to make sure that the contracts that they have are honored. It is a horrible, horrible situation. It's certainly, it's impacting both the individual employees who are being treated horribly, but it's also impacting our constituents who rely upon those federal employees for the services that they provide.
Thank you, Congressman. Our next caller is David from Seattle. David, you're live on the call with the Congressman. Please go ahead and ask your question, David.
Hi, Adam. I'm curious to know how you expect Republicans, you say that you have to respectfully work with them or whatever to, until they fear their own constituents and then they'll work with you. But Republicans have pretty consistently shown that they won't work with Democrats either through fear or whatever it is that, ideology or whatever. How do you expect them to work with you to change anything?
Well, the stock market dropping by, almost 2,500, over 3,000 points in 2 days has really ramped up the pressure on them. And by the way, I did not use the word respectfully.
I know.
I'm not saying we should ask them nicely. I'm saying we should aggressively point out how they are harming their constituents by choosing to follow a cult instead of the interests of the country. So I think we have to be really aggressive about it. And we have been. One of the things that Hakeem Jeffries' Democratic Caucus has helped set up is doing town hall meetings in Republican districts to bring out Republicans' constituents and have an opportunity to let them voice their concerns about what's happening and driving home that point. Look, this is a bad situation, and I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Donald Trump won the presidency, Republicans won the House and the Senate, and they are exercising that power aggressively. And thus far, they have been ignoring all of the complaints about the incredible harmful effects of that. We have to keep that pressure up. And you have seen some responses. I mean, Don Bacon, Republican from Nebraska, has gone totally against the tariffs, and he's introducing a piece of legislation to try to overturn them. And the Senate already passed that. This is a key point. The president is exercising this power under his emergency powers in a variety of different areas. A lot of the deportations he's doing is because he's using this Alien Enemies Act, claiming that we are at war with Venezuela. And on the tariffs, he is using emergency powers. Presidents are not supposed to be able to implement tariffs on their own. It's what Congress passes, but he's declared an emergency. If we can pass what the Senate passed and undeclare that emergency, that stops the president's ability to impose these tariffs. So, and I forget what the numbers are at right now after the most recent elections. I think we're sitting at 220 to 213 because we had 2 Democrats pass away tragically just in the last month and a half, or less than that. But it's close. And you put pressure on them, then they can't get the votes. This budget fight that's coming up, there are some of their members who actually, believe in the debt and the deficit as a problem, and they see how terrible this budget is. Put pressure on them, defeat the budget, then that blocks their ability to move forward. So I have no illusions about how easy this is. I mean, the degree to which the Republican Party has decided to simply follow Trump is shocking and appalling. I mean, to me, January 6th was disqualifying. And on January 7th, a majority of Republicans agreed. On January 8th, they changed their mind. It is a horrible abdication of responsibility, and we have got to fight back against it. But like I said, I got no illusions that this is going to be easy. It's been vastly harder than it should have been, but we got to keep raising our voices and showing people how this is hurting them. Whether you're a Trump supporter or not, if all of a sudden your business goes under because the cost of the goods you need for it went up by 30% overnight, that's a Republican policy. You're seeing farmers who are by and large Republican. The impact on them is devastating. You're seeing veterans who can't get access to the care that they need or are being fired by the thousands in the federal jobs that they have. So there are groups of people who were supportive of Trump who are now having their lives upended by his policies. Those are the people we have to get to. And it's not going to be easy. The voice has got to be loud. The examples got to be pointed out. I do also think that we have to understand why they went with Trump in the first place, what their concerns were, not act like they're awful, evil, terrible, horrible people for ever having voted for him in the first place. But now the policies are harming them, harming this country, and there's plenty of room to change their mind on that and stand up against the policies Trump has put in place. I don't think any Republican thought that they were voting for a trade war. And I know he talked about tariffs. He didn't talk about putting them on 100 different countries across the board at these levels. So I think we can clearly say you were lied to. We've all been lied to from time to time. No shame in that. But let's stand up and turn back these policies now.
Thank you, Congressman. Folks, if you're just joining the call, this is an interactive forum, and we'd love to hear from you this afternoon. If you'd like to ask a question, please press *3 on your telephone keypad. Our next caller is Janice from CTAC. Janice, you're live on the call with the Congressman. Please go ahead and ask your question, Janice.
Also listening to constituents. My business makes animal housing for medical and environmental research. We're based here in the Seattle area. Obviously, because of that, the vast majority of our customers rely on NIH funding to do their research and subsequently buy products from small businesses like mine to do their work. Has either side, the Republicans or the Democrats, realizing the impact that these government cuts are making, especially on research, have they proposed anything in the budget to help businesses find new customers, either domestic or abroad?
Well, historically, as you know, there have been a lot of things in the federal budget to do precisely that. The Small Business Administration does a lot of that. They have a big component piece of what they do, which is accessing foreign markets. And I'm forgetting the example now, but there was a small company in my district. I think they actually make security systems for private residences. And it turned out that there was demand for that, and I'm forgetting which Latin American countries. There was like 2 countries that had huge demand for it, and that became a huge part of the business. That market was opened up by the Small Business Administration, pointing it out and then helping them navigate. Here's how you sell to foreign countries. Here's how you walk through it. Federal government doing that, helping small businesses, find customers for their products. And obviously, in the example that you mentioned, funding research is something that we've done as a country, and we've done it in a bipartisan way. NIH, other foundations that are doing, cutting edge, medical research, biotechnical research. Research on energy. Contributions from those federal programs have helped develop that. So that's all there. This is what Trump is cutting, unilaterally and illegally, I might add, not even in the budget negotiation. We passed all of that funding. It was in the law, and he simply decided to stop funding it. And that's the purpose of all those lawsuits. Now, as we head to the next budget, Republicans are putting forward that budget. Yes, there are a ton of proposals as we fight through the appropriations process to say this type of research, this type of support for businesses helps grow our economy. It's a great investment by the federal government that actually helps people, and we're fighting to preserve it. And Trump is just wielding a meat axe against all of it. So that's what we're fighting back against. And I think you cite a very good example of how, and we're talking about a really small amount of money. I mean, look, two points that I really want to emphasize here on, waste, fraud, and abuse, and on the debt and the deficit, because that's the argument that Trump and his supporters are putting out. It's like, well, we got to make the government more efficient, more effective, and we got to get off our debt and deficit. But that's not what they're doing. All they are doing is weakening the country and weakening our government. As I just told you, their budget would add to the debt. And as for efficiency and effectiveness, you don't do that by going in and randomly firing a bunch of people and killing programs. That just weakens it. We've got 2 deaths now in Texas of children from measles because we're not getting the vaccine out there. This is where research goes. We are getting weaker as a country and our government is being less efficient and effective. I keep mentioning the Social Security Administration. It doesn't make it more efficient and effective to fire a bunch of people so people can't get their benefits. That's the opposite of what the American people want. Firing all the people at the Forest Service so that the parks aren't maintained, people can't access them. Nothing more efficient or effective about that. Of all the people they have fired, you can't find a single person who was fired and you can go in and say, here was your performance review, here's why your job didn't matter. They simply fired people randomly across the board, across all of these agencies, and they've killed all of these programs. And you may be asking, well, why would they do that? They would do that because Trump sees the federal government as a threat to his power. He wants to weaken the federal government so he can have more authority and more power, and so does Elon Musk. He wants to be able to do whatever he wants to do, whenever he wants to do it, without a check. That's the only thing that makes sense in terms of all these firings, because they are not about efficiency or effectiveness. And they're impacting small businesses just like yours. So yes, a lot of us understand the arguments that you played out, and we're going to fight about it, and we're going to push on these policies because we're seeing the impacts across the board, not just in blue states. Republicans, Democrats, Independents, all across the country are being harmed.
Thank you, Congressman. Our next question comes from Mike of Renton. Mike, you are live on the call with the Congressman. Please go ahead and ask your question, Mike.
Hi, Congressman. Thank you for taking my call. I'd like to know what the House Democrats are going to do about the mishandling of classified information by our this current White House. It's being called SignalGate. We saw what the Republicans did during Benghazi with about Hillary Clinton's email server. They keep bringing that up every time they're asked on Sunday television and in all their Fox News interviews. They want to bring what happened 10 years ago up, but I'd like to discuss the here and the now. How far are House Democrats willing to take this?
Well, we are, first of all, there is an Inspector General report which has been ordered. I don't find that to be sufficient because do remember that Trump fired the Inspector General. So we have secondary Inspector Generals involved in that. And we want to start our own investigation, which is what we're in a conversation about. Because to me, it's not just about this one instance. And for the uninitiated, Secretary Hegseth and National Security Advisor Mike Waltz were on Signal group chat discussing specific attack plans before they were carried out in Yemen, literally giving anyone who was listening a heads up on where, when our service members were going to carry out these attacks that the president had ordered. An unbelievable breach of security. And yes, that individually was stupid, but Secretary Hegseth since that time has said there was nothing wrong with it, which means that it's going to happen again. And also, I believe this is part of the problem with appointing people based on loyalty, not ability. And Pete Hegseth is the least qualified person in the history of the department to become Secretary of Defense, and it shows. So yes, we want to do our own investigation. Now, I actually sat on the Benghazi committee, and I found it shameful the way the Republicans handled that. I think they lied, they manipulated, and they made, such a big deal out of it just to try and harm Hillary Clinton at the expense of the truth. We're not going to do that, but we're going to do a reasonable investigation that will talk about exactly what went wrong and hold this administration accountable, at least on the facts, to not let them bury what happened and act like it was normal and okay.
Thank you, Congressman. Our next question was submitted online by Jason. This pertains to DOJ's aim to reduce bureaucracy. Jason says many veterans fear that they will lose access to critical benefits and services. What are you going to do to ensure these changes actually improve rather than to harm the lives of veterans?
Well, first, we have to stop these changes because these changes are not going to improve the lives of veterans. As I've been discussing, they've fired employees from the VA who are providing crucial services to veterans. They've also frozen a variety of different spending accounts, which are used by veterans hospitals to help make sure that veterans can access care. So what we have to do is we have to unfreeze those accounts and hire back the employees. I have worked with Nick Brown on this one specifically on lawsuits that will, undo these laws, and courts have agreed on that. And then the other thing we have to do is stop the Republican budget, is make sure that they aren't able to implement that to lock into law all of these changes that are harming our veterans. So, look, if there are ways that the VA is doing business that are inefficient and ineffective, let's get after it. Let's say, okay, if that money isn't being spent well here, let's spend it over here. These employees aren't performing necessary services, make your case. But that's not what they did. And again, I really want to emphasize, it's not like we have a bloated bureaucracy here. And I know Republicans point to the fact that the VA is actually one agency that has grown in employees over the course of the last 3 or 4 years. But it's grown because we passed the PACT Act. The PACT Act, which added to the benefits that veterans could access. So we expanded the programs that were available. So we expanded the number of people to help implement them. So yeah, my bottom line here is there's not a way to sort of make what Trump is doing more efficient, more effective. It has to be stopped.
Thank you, Congressman. Next question comes from Eddie. Eddie submitted his question on Facebook, and he says, what is the strategy for the Democrats to deal with the flood the zone approach employed by the Trump administration? I don't see or feel the Democrats doing anything cohesively to deal with this.
Well, I think first of all, you have to have a narrative on this, because yes, you flood the zone and then you can be chasing after every little thing. And if you're chasing after a little thing about, well, what Trump did at the Kennedy Center, or certain person that he deported, or one particular program that got cut, and then you get caught up in a complicated argument. No, you have to start with an overall across the top narrative. And that narrative is what I started this call with. What Trump is doing is he is weakening the country to consolidate power. And that power is going to benefit the billionaires like Elon Musk, and it's going to hurt working people. And then you take each specific example. Social Security, we're not going to be able to access the benefits as well. He's going to cut Medicaid while cutting taxes for the wealthy. So working people who depend upon Medicaid. And by the way, there's a great article, I think it was in the Seattle Times today, about how Medicaid is a middle class benefit for the most part. Yes, the poor benefit from it, but so do the middle class. So it's all part of the narrative that Trump is consolidating power in the hands of the few at the expense of the many. That's the message you have to drive. And yes, Democrats have been delivering that message. I think Cory Booker did a remarkable job of it over the course of 24 hours of delivering that message. We saw the protests that were out there this weekend. I have been doing videos, not quite daily, but at least 5 or 6 times a week, making this case. I'm doing my telephone town hall meetings. I've been on all manner of different cable television delivering that message. Now, will you be able to find in all of that some people on the Democratic side who are saying things slightly different? Of course. I mean, this is a huge tent of people who are trying to drive home this message. And I've used this example before, but I'll use it again. During the State of the Union, there was a lot of criticism of the Democratic Party for a number of different reasons. But one was you had Al Green out there screaming at Trump, calling him a liar on the House floor, and being kicked out, which was a pretty dramatic show to stand up and aggressively push back. And then our official response was provided by Alyssa Slotkin. And it was a very sober, measured, here's why what Trump is doing is harming the American people. And people say, they're off message. Are they going to be loud and obnoxious about it? Or are they going to be calm and centered? It's okay to do both. And I know there are some people who disagree with me on this, but it really is good for Al Green for calling the president a liar while he was lying to the American people. Good for Al Green to point out that, so we're supposed to show up at the State of the Union to respect the institution. but it is honoring a man who sent an armed mob to that very institution to try to overturn an election. So to point out he doesn't deserve that respect because he is the one who is undermining the institutions that you're claiming we're supposed to respect. Good point. But Alyssa Slotkin, she won a race in Michigan, highly contested state, same time that Donald Trump was winning that state. Alyssa knows what the hell she's doing, and she delivered that message forcefully. Both of those messages are good. And I think the notion that there's one killer line, one message that we're going to come up with, and everybody just needs to parrot it, is not the way politics and public policy works. And I know it's frustrating. Everyone's got an idea out there. I get a dozen ideas a day from a bunch of different people. But do understand that there is a broader plan that is being implemented here. And not every single idea that people have is going to be great, but we need to grow, expand, flood the zone, and have that basic narrative be as our guide as we implement these individual pieces. And lastly, I know a lot of people are frustrated. Look, I'm not happy that we lost the last election. Personally, I think a lot of that had to do with Joe Biden's ill-fated decision to run for a second term. Never should have done that. Put us in a weaker position, right up to the day that he dropped out, and then we were trying to scramble to put everything together at that point. There were a lot of bad decisions that were made. But I, at least for my part, have been running and winning difficult campaigns for, almost 40 years now. I've been passing legislation, fighting my way through Republicans, working with Democrats. There are a lot of very experienced people who have been in tough fights repeatedly and won them. So we are committed to this fight, and there are a lot more of us up here who know what we're doing than I think a lot of people give us credit for. Now, none of that is to say, calm down. Don't calm down, all right? Be excited, be angry, be out there, be pushing, be aggressive. Because I'll tell you, that's one cornerstone of this. I totally disagree with James Carville's take that Democrats need to lay down and play dead and let the Republicans fail. I get the argument. It's just a 1990s argument, and we're not in that world. We are in a world of constant information, of constant competition for people's attention. We have to be aggressively trying to get that attention. The protests are a good way to do that. The town hall meetings in Republican districts are a good way to do that. Telephone town hall meetings are a good way to do that. Getting on social media, trying to get people's attention. I've been on a number of different podcasts already, including Pod Save America, Midas Touch. I'm reaching out to Joe Rogan. I don't know how that's going to go. We have to flood the zone with our message too. And by and large, we're doing it. Now, this is a fight where you can get better every day, and you have to get better every day. And we will. But that's the basics of what we need to do and what we are seeing come together. It will be a tough fight, but I believe it is coming together and it is growing in momentum.
Thank you, Congressman. Folks, if you have a question, please press *3 on your telephone keypad. And if you're enjoying this update, I encourage you to subscribe to the Congressman's newsletter. You can do that by pressing *6. Congressman, next caller is Erlen from Renton. Erlen, you are live on the call with the Congressman. Please go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yes. Perfect. So, thank you for taking my call, Congressman. I immigrated to the U.S. for the last 20 years. There's one thing I know that what we are doing right now is trying to fight for the human rights and everything else. But one thing I do notice that our two parties were actually every 4 years, majority of their direction actually change, and then fight this term with the states. Last term, something happened extreme to the left, and then this term, something happened extreme to the right. Right? There is a possibility. I'm a firm believer of check and balance, by the way. But is there any way that two parties can stick together and then just work out something like 10, 20 years, long term, which can benefit for the country?
Yeah, I mean, look, there are efforts to do that. I mean, what has happened in the last decade or so is an aggressive polarization, where both parties have consolidated and divided away from each other. And conversations across party lines have become more difficult because each party is more dug in on a wide range of issues that they're not flexible about. And it has become too much of a team sport and not enough of, let's talk about the issues. How do we solve problems? How do we deal with the economic inequality that I just talked about? What is a sensible immigration policy? So, yes, it has become vastly more difficult. And I think it's become more partisan and more ideological. You have a lot of interest groups that form around a pretty narrow set of issues and then insist upon absolute loyalty to those issues by both parties. And that again narrows the ability to find practical solutions to the problems we face. And I think immigration is a great example. I do not agree with what Donald Trump is doing on immigration. Number one, he is violating people's rights by deporting people without due process, and also deporting them just based on free speech. He's frozen all refugee programs. He has, cut off immigration across the board in a way that is deeply harmful. He is terrorizing the community of undocumented immigrants across the country. However, I think it is reasonable of people to say that we should have some border security. We had a huge migration problem in the last 3 or 4 years. A lot of people came across the border, and we were struggling to provide for them. In the city of Tukwila, in South King County, we got by migrants in the state legislature who have $30 to help pay for that. It was a challenge. We didn't have a simple process for legal immigration. Now, in the world that you just described, we ought to be able to have a conversation between Republicans and Democrats where we stand up for strong support for immigration, strong support, to my mind, for the undocumented population that's here, that's not committing crimes. They're working, they're contributing to our community. We have been dependent upon them for decades. We ought to be able to treat them with respect and at the same time have a secure border and have a legal immigration system that makes sense. So much of that conversation gets caught up in a partisan fight. I've tried to have this conversation with people on the left side of it. Very few of them want to have that conversation. They don't want to talk about border security. They don't want to talk about how to have a more sensible legal immigration system. They just want to oppose what Trump is doing, which is fine, but it doesn't get us to a solution. And it frustrated a lot of people and frankly pushed them into Trump's camp, even though I don't think they agree with this hyper aggressive approach. So I have, worked throughout my career to do what you just described. And I think I've gotten some good things done on legislation. Gosh, the trade adjustment assistance that help workers that have lost their job to trade. I got them greater benefits to help reach them and give them help while they were trying to find jobs. I passed, full paid parental leave for federal employees, 12 weeks paid. That has dramatically improved the ability to have access to those benefits. And all of that was working in a bipartisan way to accomplish things. We went after, sexual assault in the military, major problem for years. We finally took control away from the commanders and gave it to independent agencies so that people in the military can feel better protected from sexual assault. That was bipartisan. That was a conversation. It wasn't ideologically driven. I wasn't trying to score partisan points. I was trying to pass legislation that would help people. And yes, we've drifted away from that. I think too much of it is ideological, interest group, partisan driven, and not enough of it is, here's the problem, let's try to go solve it. And let me also say, for those of you out there, if the Republicans, if I can't get it done by working with Republicans, I'm happy to try to find ways to get things done without them. I've passed some things on straight party lines too. If that's what the situation demands, then fine. But let's stay focused on solving problems that people face, as opposed to standing up for some narrow ideology that we seem to think it has all the answers to all the problems. Let's be practical about how we approach this. And I think we've gotten away from that. And I'm fighting a very difficult battle to try and maintain that practical problem solving, helping people approach to politics and public policy.
Thank you, Congressman. Next question comes from Instagram, from Bookshelves Too Full handle. This person says, how can we move our government to fiscal responsibility?
Yeah, that's a huge problem. When I first got elected to Congress in 1996, I supported the balanced budget agreement, and we had a surplus for 4 straight years. And then a whole lot of things happened. 9/11 happened, the Great Recession happened, a couple wars happened, COVID happened, and we've spent a lot more money in a number of different areas. But we got away from the principle that fiscal responsibility mattered. And speaking of ideological arguments, I had a lot of people arguing with me that debt and deficit didn't matter. There's this thing called modern monetary theory. All modern monetary theory says is, look, the federal government's debt and deficit is different than anybody else's for the simple reason that the federal government can print their own money. And that's true. It is different. It puts us in a different category and leads to different decisions. But what we've learned over the course of a couple hundred years of economics now is that the federal government falls too in love with printing its own money. Then you got a problem with inflation. You have a real problem that then reduces the value of that money. So you can't just run up whatever debt and deficit you want. And yet I had people arguing that to me. I said, well, gosh, if that's the case, if debts and deficits don't matter, why don't we just spend $60 trillion instead of $6? They do matter. And we have gotten ourselves into a deep hole. Now, what should we do about it? Number one, biggest thing for me, and people probably don't like this, I don't think we need any more tax cuts. Now, if you're talking about state and local government, I have a lot of sympathy. I've seen the property taxes and sales taxes and other taxes go up on the state and local level. And I'm not in love with the efficiency and effectiveness of our state and local governments in Seattle, King County, and Washington State. I think we can do better. But on the federal level, we have been cutting taxes over and over and over again ever since George W. Bush's massive tax cut back in 2001. By the way, right before that tax cut was the last year that we actually had a balanced budget. And then we've added to it and added to it and added to it. And primarily, when you're talking about federal income taxes, those are taxes that if they're cut, they benefit people with money. That's kind of the nature of income. So I don't think we should extend the Trump tax cuts. I don't think we should pass a whole bunch of other tax cuts. I think that would help. What we need to do is get healthcare costs under control. We spend twice as much money per capita on healthcare as any other country in the world. And yet we consistently rank somewhere between 30th and 40th in terms of the quality of care that we get. There's a lot of different reasons for it. And I could go off in a 10-minute speech about healthcare. I went through my own thing. I had a chronic pain thing for a number of years and also a chronic anxiety problem, on and off, various different medications. But finally, 3.5 years worth of psychotherapy helped me. And I also found a muscle activation therapist who figured out all the various problems with my body. But I went to 100 different, providers of one kind or another. Got terrible advice. A lot of it wasn't covered by insurance. I wound up paying for things that I'm pretty sure I didn't need, or I should say the healthcare system wound up paying for things I'm pretty sure I didn't need. So if we got more efficient and more effective about the way we provided healthcare, that could have a huge impact on what we need to do, because we do not have to balance the budget. That it is true that because of the U.S.'s economic position in the world, we can borrow money effectively and at a very low rate. But we are getting to the point where the size of the debt and the yearly deficit is going to have an impact on our economic well-being and our ability to pay for things. So yes, we ought to get this under control. But again, I'll come back to where I started. Trump's talking about this. His budget raises the debt by several $1 trillion. So let's have a reasonable, fiscal responsible approach, and we can start by not doing more tax cuts for the people on the high economic end of this country right now.
Thank you, Congressman. Our next question comes from Brian of Auburn. Brian, you're live on the call with the Congressman. Please go ahead, Brian.
Thank you, Congressman Smith. I've been voting for you for about the last 35 years, 40 years. I'm a letter carrier here in Auburn, 21 years. I'm just about to retire, so this really probably isn't going to affect me too much. But the Postal Service's future seems to be in question. And I just want to let you and everybody else know that we're not very happy. Our last contract that we just got is horrible. And there's actually talk about us perhaps maybe even going on strike in a grassroots effort similar to what happened in the 70s, even knowing that Trump will fire us all. But that will pretty much send this country into a economic disaster, even though people think that we don't matter anymore. We do. And
Yes, you do.
ironically enough, the people that are going to be affected the most are going to be the Trump voters in the rural areas of America, because they're not going to get their medicine. Their post offices are going to close. Joy is gone, which is great, but his his successor is probably going to be just as bad, because Trump's going to appoint him. I know most people think this is a pretty boring thing and that they take for granted what we do, but it's a hard job, and I want to know what your thoughts are on this.
Yeah. First of all, the Postal Service is an incredibly effective group of civil servants who provide a very necessary service for the people of this country and needs to be preserved. And I forget, several years back now, we passed the Postal Reform Act that really put the Postal Service on a firmer financial footing. There was this complicated thing about how you guys had to pay into this system that was undermining your financial viability. And we fixed that. We passed it. But now Trump basically, I'm pretty sure, wants to privatize our postal service. And as you just described, that would cut off service to a wide variety of people, particularly people in rural areas. Look, it's all part of the Trump administration's contempt for the federal workforce. And this is a radical libertarian ideology that they're trying to put in place, which is, where I keep coming back to. You talk about making government more efficient and more effective. Well, the government's job is to provide services to the American people. It's not the government's job to make a profit. We don't want the government to make a profit. They're not a private company. They're supposed to be providing services to the American people that we need. And postal delivery is one big one. But if you have the Trump-Musk way of looking at it, which is to say that they want to be libertarians, they want to smash our federal government, then you concentrate those services in the hands of the few. And one of the great things the federal government does is they do help with opportunity. As you point out, everybody can get mail. You have a service that is provided for everybody. Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, our public education system, which the Trump administration is going after as well. Federal government helps out poorer school districts so that people in poorer communities can get better access to K-12 education. On a range of issues, the federal government, it's is not the largest portion of budgets in some instances, but they really help the people who need the most help. And I think the post office is a good example of this. So I'm deeply worried that this administration's plan is to privatize it and shut it down. And I think we need to fight back against this. And I thank you for the service you provide for our community.
Thank you, Congressman. We've just got a few minutes left, sir. Do you have any closing thoughts to share?
Let's just take one more question, and I'll wrap up on that question.
Perfect. Yes, sir. We've got Patty from Federal Way. Patty, you're live on the call. Patty, you're live on the call with the Congressman. Yes.
Oh, yeah. Wait a second.
Look, I got you now.
Yeah.
How are you?
You do. Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you for taking my call, Congressman.
Sure.
I've heard you talk, and I've heard people ask questions, and I see it in the news. What are we going to get the government to do about what's going on? What are we going to get our state to do what's going on? But my question is, what can we do as citizens that want to help and feel like we're just sitting here watching participants? And many of us want to do something, and we kind of need some guidance where to go.
Yeah. Well, first of all, it's really important to speak up. And there are a lot of different organizations. You're in Federal Way. There's a South Sound Indivisible group that I met with a couple of times, which is helping people organize and figuring out how to speak out effectively. So your voice matters. That's a pretty good group to draw. I would say, think about what issue is important to you. If Social Security and Medicare are important to you, there's, a variety of different groups. I'm spacing on the name of one of them right now, but that organize around that issue. So figure out what issue it is that matters to you, and then there are groups out there that are advocating for that. So speak up and organize around the groups that are out there. It's happening. You don't necessarily have to show up at a protest to speak up. If you want to, that's great. That's part of it. But I think find those groups that are advocating for the programs that are most being jeopardized. There's groups on the basic question of democracy, on the rule of law. Certainly the ACLU is out there advocating, but there are other legal organizations that are pushing back, as President Trump violates the law and violates the Constitution and violates individual rights. So I would encourage you to, you can do the general stuff. It's great to contact me. It's great to contact your senators. If you've got friends in other states, contact them as well. But I think it's really good to just find an issue that you are passionate about and organize and work with the groups that are organizing around that, because they're out there, they're growing in number and they're growing in intensity. Join them, speak up, be involved. Thank you very much.
Congressman.
Go ahead.
I'm just going to invite you to share your final thoughts.
Yeah, no, I'll end where I started. This is part of an ongoing process. Well, on the one hand, I am deeply concerned about where our country is headed right now, and the fact that President Trump seems hell-bent on undermining our representative democracy and weakening us in area after area, as we've discussed today. On the other hand, I'm fired up about pushing back against that. I know how important it is. I believe in this country passionately. I believe in the role that the federal government plays in helping create the best, strongest, most just community that we have. I grew up in SeaTac. My father was a ramp serviceman at United Airlines, total blue-collar family, but I had a good K-12 education system to go to right there in SeaTac. Walked out my front door, walked to my elementary school, my junior high school, and my high school. My father was in a union that had legal protections that enabled him to make a decent wage, loading bags on and off of an airplane and raise a family. I went to college. My father died my sophomore year in college, but there were benefits there that helped me finish. I worked at United Postal Service to help pay my way through college. Union job. The Teamsters, again, the legal protections for unions enabled me to make $10 an hour throwing boxes on and off of a truck. Actually, I was just loading, I wasn't throwing them off. All of those things are what help make the American dream possible. They are being threatened by this administration. So as frightening as it is, as maddening as it is, I am passionate about fighting against it. And I look forward to working with all of you to help be effective in that effort. And I thank you for sharing a little bit of your Sunday afternoon with me. We will do this again soon. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
Thank you, Congressman, and thank you, everyone, for joining today's telephone town hall with Congressman Adam Smith. If you'd like to stay up to date on the Congressman's work, please follow him on Facebook, X, and Instagram at Rep. Adam Smith, as well as on Blue Sky at adamsmith.house.gov. And if you would like to subscribe to the Congressman's newsletter, please stay on the line and leave your name and email address after the tone. Thank you and have a blessed afternoon. Goodbye.